So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes talking just a little bit about productivity, and particularly in benchmarking productivity. I have no disclosures for this talk. What I'd like to do this morning is really define what benchmarking is, to try and determine what data to collect to help us in the echo lab and how to collect that data, and to discuss some of the pitfalls of benchmarking. So when we define benchmarking, really what it is the process of comparing your practice's performance with an external standard. And it could be any aspect of your practice's performance. But what it does involve is collecting and reporting data on clinical processes and outcomes. And I think a lot of people prefer to characterize benchmarking as a science, but I would offer that it is as much an art as a science, and we'll talk a little bit about why. The objectives of benchmarking are really to determine what and where the improvements are needed. So this is a quality improvement tool, but we're doing it by looking externally to see how other organizations really achieve their high performance. So we're looking at best in class and comparing ourselves to them. Ideally partnering to share information, and then we use the information to really improve our performance and track our progress over time. And the whole point of this is to optimize our resources so we can maintain a competitive edge. A couple key points, and these are courtesy of my friend Jeff Rose. Remember, through this whole talk and in any other type of quality improvement, if it's not documented, it can't be measured. And if it's not measured, it can't be managed. And since this is a business of echo session, I think it's important that we remember that. So how do you benchmark? Well, like any quality improvement process, you really need to document your current process and then identify and clearly define key metrics. And that actually can be a very sticky point. We'll talk about that a little bit more. You need to understand where your current performance gaps are, collect data and analyze it, and then apply what you've learned, but keeping in mind that you have unique internal and external conditions. And what we're doing is really just a PDSA cycle, Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, and that's something that is a standard quality improvement tool. The difference is that we're looking at our performance again, then in comparison to an external standard. There are many sources where you can find performance measures. Professional organizations like ASE and ACC, accrediting organizations, IAC and Joint Commission. You can refer to the literature, especially in terms of appropriate use criteria, and see what other people are getting. Criteria selected by health plans, health agencies, and health information technology vendors. Here's just an example, ACCHA care metrics. There's all sorts of things out there, and if they do the definitions for you, it actually helps a lot. There are pitfalls, however. As with any other type of research, really, you need to make sure that you have an adequate sample. And if you restrict that sample size to only one other lab or facility or sonographer or physician, you can really get erroneous conclusions from your data. The other thing that's really important is to make sure that you understand that the numbers and performance are always changing. And this is where trends are really, really helpful. If you set your goal that you are going to be just like Lab A in 2 years, be aware that in 2 years, Lab A might be at a different performance level. And you really have to be careful with the conclusions drawn from your data, because if you do not define your metrics well, then your conclusions will be erroneous. And again, metric definitions are tricky. Just to give you an example, I'm involved with ACC in trying to develop non-invasive imaging quality metrics. So I'm going to show you just one. This will be kind of small for you to see, but I don't expect you to read it. We're looking at ped sedation and adverse events. And the group spent quite a lot of time defining. And this is what the metric ended up looking like. So this is the numerator. And we are looking at what we consider minor sedation events, moderate events, and major events. And there were hours and hours and hours of work put into defining this. The same was true when we were looking at the population from which we were drawing the data. And it includes excluding populations, because you don't want to include everybody if it's not applicable to what you're looking at. In terms of echo performance measures, I know we've seen this graphic a lot over the course of the past 2 days. When we really look at quality in CV imaging, we are forced almost to look mostly at structure and process because it's really hard to get to patient outcomes when you look at diagnostic imaging. So we tend to look at things like staff experience and certification. Is the lab accredited? How long does the exam take? What's the image quality like? And that actually isn't all that easy to define either. And then procedure volumes. That seems to be an easy target. So since we know that the administrators tend to worship at the altar of productivity and thus procedure volumes, let's look at that a little bit more closely. So we're looking at 3 sonographers, 3 different labs. We've got Sally, Jane, and Bill. Well, Bill looks like he's a go-getter. He's getting, over the course of a week, we've got 8, 7, 7, 8, and 8. And what we chose as our metric was just the number of exams per day. Sally's doing okay. She's a steady performer. And Jane, she's just not up to snuff. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's look at one day. Jane, who we were worried about, actually did 2 3-hour research protocols and 2 hypertrophic cardiomyopathies with contrast and AMO. I'd say that's productive. Sonographers? Yes? I'm seeing nods. And Bill, the high performer, did 8 chemo follow-up studies that take 20 minutes apiece. So the point is that the numbers do not always tell the whole story, and you really need to dig deeper into the data. Now, when we're looking at a little bit higher level, let's look at outpatient stress echo numbers. And this data is courtesy of MedAxiom. There were 130 practices that pooled their data and looked at this, over 2,200 physicians. And they're able to look at outpatient stress echo per physician for all the practices. So I'm able to look at this and say, okay, well, you know, I'm here at about the 75th percentile. Great. That lets me know where I am. It doesn't tell me what the different practices are, if there's regional differences in the practices or anything like that. So again, this is good initial information, but you often need to dig deeper when you're benchmarking. Trends are also helpful. And this is a situation where I can look and say, you know what, I'm really trending upward, and I'm doing a whole lot of stress echoes compared to everybody else. Are they all appropriate? Or I'm trending downward in my transthoracics, but I have a big population of oncology patients, so maybe they're being underrepresented, and that's how that can be helpful. I wanted to pull out just one study because it kind of made me chuckle when I was looking at it. This was an absolutely marvelous effort to try to get to productivity in academic peds labs. Part of what I enjoyed was the after much deliberation part, because again, picking the metric is really, really hard. And what they finally decided to use was full-time physician, the average number of studies per day. They got some good data, looked at staff productivity. For physicians, estimated daily FTE, studies per FTE per year and per day, and for the sonographers, studies per FTE per year. However, the figures were not adjusted for case complexity, time requirement for TEE, level of expertise, or available of sonographer assistance, and it did not address quality and accuracy. So I'm not bringing this to light to say, hey, we can't do this. It's just that numbers alone only tell so much of the story. The other part that was interesting to me was in the discussion, and they freely acknowledged the number part was easy to do. However, trying to figure out what to do with those numbers and figure out what they needed for staffing for the lab was a lot harder. I want to spend just a moment talking about appropriate use because that's something that comes up repeatedly during these sessions. In the IAC standards, you are required for an accredited lab to track appropriate use. And there needs to be a mechanism for educating those referring physicians, which was just referred to. However, there's no target. And one thing I get asked periodically is, why is there no target for this standard? We need to know what it is we need to get to. And I would offer that sometimes targets are good and sometimes they're not. As a quality improvement tool, you can benchmark your AUC with published literature and then use that to improve your own performance without having a target. There is an example of where a target has been mandated, and this is an appropriate use for advanced imaging. In January 2017, No more than 5% of the total number of ordering professionals should be outliers. And in 2020, prior authorization will be applied to those outliers. And quite honestly, it's not the referring physicians really that get bit by this, it's our facilities. So we owe it to ourselves to make sure that the facilities are maintaining appropriate use. And again, this is for advanced imaging, not echocardiography, but I can't help but think that someday it will be applied. And there's an app for that. So if you need to know how to look at appropriate use, there's certainly the 40-page appropriate use guideline, but I find the app very helpful. And ACC also has the focus tool, which can be used for echocardiography and the other imaging modalities. So this has been just a really quick jump through benchmarking as a quality improvement process. And you can see by this graphic that, again, it is not a simple thing. We can look at many different things to benchmark. We need to keep a lot of things in mind in terms of defining metrics. However, this is an excellent quality improvement tool for you to look internally and then compare externally, because really the goal is for us to be able to use that external reference to get from where we are to where we want to be. And I guess maybe putting it another way, benchmarking is the difference between teaching yourself how to hit a golf ball and taking lessons from Jack Nicklaus. Or insert the golf pro of your choice, but maybe not target Tiger Woods right now. Probably not a good choice. I thank you for your attention.